Welcome, everyone. Today, we're thrilled to sit down with the maestro of the microphone, the sonic strategist, the philosophical father of flourishing podcasters, Matthew Bliss, owner of MB Podcast Services and host of Rethinking Podcasting. Matthew uses the Socratic method to challenge the podcast industry's norms, helping creators build shows they genuinely love making. Today, we're diving into two things that define any creative journey: creativity and risk. We'll discuss how embracing creative chaos can actually be the smartest business strategy of all. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Helen, thanks for having me.
Is there anything in the bio when we introduce you that listeners might not know about you?
Look, I figure most of the time I'm a bit of an enigma with the way that I do things. It's something that I'm actually trying to get better at now, is trying to make my thinking a little bit more transparent and share my opinions a bit more often than I used to. And the biggest part of that is rethinking podcasting. Like, philosophy has been a major part of my life for a long time, like all the way back to when I was I'm going to get the grades wrong for whichever audience you have, but year 9, so probably 16 years old, I've been studying philosophy, and a lot of it guides my thinking on a lot of subjects. But the key thing is that it pushes me to think and consider a lot, but perhaps not outwardly and openly. And yeah, so what I'm hoping is that anyone who's coming to this conversation that's seen me before will learn something new. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that I assumed about you is that philosophy plays a really big role in the way that you think and the way you operate in business and in creation. But I notice, I guess, for listeners who might not know you, how do those two things intersect? How do you process podcasting in a way that might be different from other producers or other creators through philosophy?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe that would be one of the little phrases that I like to coin throughout my podcast. I've called it podcaster divergence, which is where a lot of podcasters will start on the common path that we've all had to start with, like picking the right microphone. What do we talk about? How do I structure the material? How many downloads are the right number of downloads? That experience is fairly common among the people who start. But as you get more experienced over time, you start to diverge from what is common, or at least hopefully you start to move away from all that common advice and start coming into your own a little bit. As a podcaster, as a person experiencing relationships with other people through virtual or in-person means, however it might happen. And for me, becoming someone who offers services like editing or production or consulting, coaching, whatever, it's an extra step on top of that. And the philosophical component has helped inform my approach to the industry as a kind of a buffer to avoid the growth hack culture. A lot of the stuff around podcasting is about what to do to get a result and who can I copy or who should I listen to about doing the thing to get to the result I want. But when you think about what I just described, podcaster divergence, the parabolic curve that moves further away from the linear curve on a graph, you're moving further away from the known as well. And it means it requires more introspection. And the philosophical component for me helps with that introspection a lot. It also helps with the criticism of things that may not warrant the criticism to start with, but the scientific method tells us to ask how to disprove something, not how to prove it. There's a lot of confirmation bias in the podcasting industry at the same time. So I'd urge anyone who's considering philosophy as a potential, you wouldn't call it a side hustle, whatever you do with your brains, that's not like a second job. If you want to enjoy philosophy differently and you want to bring it to what you're doing in podcasting or any other creative endeavor, it's to ask the questions that go against the grain and why something is really there,
That's interesting that you say that, because that's something that the two of us share. I studied philosophy later than you in college, But one of the things I love about philosophy is how you are taught how to dissect a type of thinking and try to pinpoint methods or areas that thinking might be flawed. And it teaches you to be a lifelong learner, which I appreciate about you. You have a way of making things be more constructive than helpful, which is a perfect segue to the first section of what we're talking about today, which is creative fuel, focusing on authenticity and joy in what we do. And so, what is the most restrictive piece of conventional wisdom you challenge in the podcasting industry, in the creative industry, and why?
There's two that come to mind, actually. The first is that you must be consistent, but the nature of consistency, I think, gets confused quite a lot.
Mm.
And the other one is actually what people describe as authenticity. But we'll knock out the first one first. So consistency, when people talk about it as a solution to a problem that a podcaster might have, they're usually saying, just keep doing it. Just keep coming back to the microphone, keep recording the episodes, keep releasing them, and the answers will come. Also, there's kind of a scare tactic there too, that people should always be publishing episodes at the same time of the week, every week, in order for an audience to predict exactly what's happening with you. Because as soon as you drop that cadence, they're going to disappear. They're going to be like, where's my episode? Why haven't I got an episode right now? And they're going to chastise you and be entirely critical and disappear into the ether. This is an extrapolation that the industry has made and kind of leveraged a little bit to try and get people back to, that's the other part of everything that I'm probably going to be talking about today, is that there's two incentives from any position for podcasting. There's those who want you to continue to do it because it's a great thing to do. It's a great creative thing to pursue. Even Tom Webster from Sounds Profitable is now tackling the pod fade or creator fade issue. But the other side is the capitalistic incentive. There's tech products that want to incentivize you to continue your podcast so you can pay them to use their product to continue their, I delightfully call impoopification for those who may not the other expletive version of that. But there's two incentives from either side. One is genuine and the other tends to be about money. And so consistency from a company that's offering a recording and editing service online for a fee every month might be concerned with you being consistent all the time. So the general advice you're going to get from them is, come back every week. Make sure that you've lined our coffers so that we can continue to offer this product and continue to make your podcast. And the other nefarious side of this, which is still a duality I'm trying to explore in a few places, is that anyone who's tried podcasting or listened into the podcasting industry before has probably heard of if you do more than 7 episodes, you're better than 50% of the podcast industry, or you get to 21 episodes, you're in the top 10%, and 43 episodes and you're in the top 1%, or whatever the numbers are these days. That kind of toxically positive approach to push you to be consistent, to continue to release with the only reward at the end, being able to say that you're better than this number of people when you're trying to do a thing for yourself and for the people who would enjoy the podcast you're trying to do. It starts to pile on itself a little bit, where the consistency wisdom isn't so wisdomous anymore. It is important to keep in mind. Audience expectations, important, but you spend enough time thinking about it and, introspecting in yourself about what you should do with regards to keeping up a podcast and making sure that it's sustainable. Whatever consistency means is an important thing to consider. The other side of that is authenticity. People can sometimes presume that authenticity means unedited. So come to the microphone, record something, cough, dog barks out the back, washing gets done, have to quickly put that in the basket and come back to the microphone. All those things included don't necessarily mean authentic. It means it's as it was. Raw is not authentic. And authenticity is a big thing in social media at the moment as well. It's all about driving a movement where people should do less to do more, but also show more of themselves in order to expend less effort. And I mean, we could quote plenty of people. I think Simon Sinek and Brené Brown would be able to talk to enough things across a couple of hours where vulnerability is not sharing everything about yourself with the world. And in podcasting, sharing an authentic episode is not editing nothing. Like you can have an authentic episode and it be edited to the standard that you're comfortable with. So consistency and authenticity, both of those things, I think, would be considered common wisdom. But at the end of the day, if you really interrogate them a little bit more, you kind of have to unpack them a little bit for your own circumstances to be able to figure it out. And the philosophy helps with that. Like trying to go through the thought patterns, it's easy to fall into a loop of action without spending time in reflection in order to find out those things. Because if all you have time to do is come to the microphone to record and release every week, and you don't have any time to sit there and go, well, I've done this for 3 months now. Is this consistency sustainable? Am I enjoying this? Is the result for my audience visible in the feedback I'm getting from them? All those things are great questions to ask. But if you don't have time to do them, sometimes you need to jump on a podcast with a great host and unpack them a little bit, maybe.
I like what you're saying about the authenticity and the consistency piece, because when you think about it, if you continue to go on a consistent path without ever rethinking the branding piece, you're essentially building a brand that you're not proud of, that you don't stand behind. And it's similar to building a business and becoming an employee of the business rather than the owner and operator of the business, which brings me into the second point, which is finding flourishing. Now that we've talked about areas that may be wrong in the conventional wisdom, you manage and edit several podcasts. If people go on mbpod.com, they'll see hundreds of shows that you've edited. And out of curiosity, I wanted to ask, where does the best, most authentic creative energy come from your clients? And how do you help them capture that creative joy?
It's difficult to say, but I think that lends credence to my answer that you'll hear in a sec. But first I want to tackle, you mentioned flourishing, because I haven't actually had much of an opportunity to entertain flourishing as a term. Because I think when I was thinking about rethinking podcasting, taking a Socratic approach to things and ancient Greek philosophy at the time, dealing with flourishing as the ultimate goal for, man, woman, people. Flourishing is happiness. Like eudaimonia is the Greek word that they often translate to. It doesn't have a direct translation to happiness, but it's some describe it as virtue. But flourishing is when you are on the path to do the thing which not in and of itself necessarily is the reward, but you're doing the thing for which it takes minimal effort and realizes the ultimate value and virtue in your life. And flourishing is what I believe every podcaster should be striving for, if they can. And that goes contrary to exactly the situation you described, where people get stuck in a podcast creation situation where they don't come to the table enjoying what they do anymore. It doesn't bring them happiness. It doesn't bring them flourishing. And I think that's probably the little secret for the clients that I've taken on so far. And I'm glad you said hundreds, because it's definitely not hundreds, but if it looks like hundreds on the website.
It looks like hundreds on the website, I'm telling you.
I think I've done an incredibly good job there. But because I've actually only been editing and producing podcasts for clients for the last 2 years. Feels longer, but only because I've managed to work with a very large number of clients and been connected with some great people who have podcasts at the moment, and some that don't actually anymore. But I started as a side hustle for people that I knew back in Australia, where in the place that I used to work, where I was doing podcasts full time, not as part of my job, but, wasn't a side hustle so much as some extra tasks I wanted to set for myself. And they became friends when I left that job and came here to Ireland, where I am now. And it's that close relationship of working collaboratively and creatively with a client that I enjoy the most, if not only because I want to offer a service where they don't have to think about the things that are a burden. Like, how do I get this podcast on Apple Podcasts? Which host do I pick? What microphone do I get? Do I even need one? How do I edit this in the best way possible to make me sound great? How do I put it on video? Biggest question at the moment. And ultimately, being the collaborative partner has meant that I can invest myself in the client's show. And more often than not, it's meeting people like yourself in podcasting or podcasting circles where my clients come from at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And usually that means there's some tangential connection, a shared interest, a similar subject. Even people I've interviewed before on personal podcasts have come on to be clients. And the design, the editing cadence, even the varying styles have been adapted and customized for each one of my clients in the way that they want it to be, as well as what it can be, some of the aspects selected by me in order to make it flourish, I guess would be the best word for it. And the span is huge, like the types of clients that I've had. I've edited for a positive reinforcement horse training podcast. I've spent a bit of time with a not-for-profit sharing stories of trauma and adversity, which requires a very specific kind of resilience as an editor and a very specific style. Like going against the advice that I mentioned before, most will tell you to avoid pauses, and yet a really like pregnant pause at a very traumatic moment when left in the edit can be incredibly powerful, which is really cool. I've edited for movie review podcasts. I've even got a tax or finance podcast from here in Ireland. Got 3 of them on board at the moment. And all of them require different things, but ultimately it's being that collaborative partner that really makes it rewarding for me, where I get to learn a lot, but also it comes out in the podcast content and how happy they are. At least I hope so.
For people that have never studied philosophy, people might not catch that, but you define the terms. What is flourishing, what it is, but you also have a couple of things that people might not know about you. You're from Australia, you traveled to Ireland, you're living in Ireland as an immigrant, and podcasting has become an opportunity to make money and to build a business. And I'm curious about this part, like what has building a business taught you, and how has the last couple of years, you said 2 or 3 years, been for you?
How long have you got? Because it's a journey when you start a business for yourself.
Yeah, I can
Well,
relate.
look, when we moved to Ireland mid-2023, it was on the cards for a long time. In fact, we probably would have moved earlier if the pandemic lockdowns in Melbourne hadn't happened the way they did. And we moved. I had every intention to get a full-time job when we moved here, but the job just didn't happen. It's something in two minds. Like every culture, every country is a little bit different. We live in the west of Ireland, which is very far away from the main city, Dublin, that you'd expect. There's also in the west, there's Galway, which is maybe a few hours away from us, but we're not in a major city, which means there's not a huge number of jobs here in the kind of the knowledge workspace where I would have usually played pretty well. A major component of what I offer is also incredibly diverse. Like I'm more a Swiss Army knife that you can start in a position and then kind of my tendrils start to feed out into other aspects of the business. And, you know, I usually take a measure of the couple of jobs where it's happened in, but it takes me about 6 to 9 months to become indispensable to a business.
Which takes time and investment.
It does. But the major aspect of that for me is that I get to do a bunch of different things, learn a bunch of different stuff. And a major component of that I've realized about myself that isn't the best thing is that any job I've had so far in Australia was about delivering for other people. So it was IT support in a school for about 6 or 7 years, and then being in government delivering IT training. And then the pandemic happens, everyone goes to remote work, and it becomes about productivity, about project management, team operation, ensuring well-being in a time of lack of security, job security, not sure what the next 6 months will bring us. All of that kind of created a package that meant when we came to Ireland and I started looking for a job, nothing really quite fit. And I wasn't really streamlined enough in terms of disciplines to be able to be attractive to someone looking for a particular type of job. It's probably the converse to people coming with a gap, like a job gap, and asking, well, what did you do for 3 or 4 years? I had a kid, or, I went traveling and took a gap a couple of years. No, this time I did too many things, became too employable for any number of jobs, and was less attractive for any one job with any number of responsibilities it might have had. At least that's how it looked to me. And I had the side hustle for podcast editing at the time. So I probably gave it 6 or 7 months, and I did finally get a training job. It was going to be in well-being for agriculture and farming, but it didn't quite work out the way I wanted it to. And so I really just said, look, why don't I go full force into the podcast editing and see what that does? And by that point, I had all of the paperwork finished that I needed to be able to work here indefinitely. Turns out being married to a citizen of the country really helps. And from that point, it was really just a journey of going through all the things that most entrepreneurs do, which is, how much do I charge for my work? Oh, I need more clients. I need to charge less to get more clients. And then I lose a bunch of time. Oh, now I don't have enough time to do for all these clients. So I need to hurriedly do this work. So there's someone who doesn't have the money to pay for it anymore, but is still demanding the work. I'll just finish this off for them so that I have a good reputation that they can talk about. And sometimes you get exploited as well. And I've been fairly vocal about the not-for-profit that I used to work for on that front, which is unfortunate, but it's the way it goes.
Yeah.
But
that before you go on, I just want to interrupt and provide a point of reflection in that so many people in the podcasting and creative industry think that they need to build their own brand, right? But what is interesting about your story is that you've spent a decade or so, more than, building other people's brands. And that's what's led to a profitable business. And that's what a lot of people don't really talk about in the online space, that in order to build community, we need to build other people up in the process. And as a therapist, as a creative, the only way I've gotten attention online, quote unquote attention online, is through dialogue like this, of like building you up and you building me up through the last episode that we recorded together. And that's something that I really appreciate about your story, is that you're very vocal and open about failed. I've spent a lot of time helping other people in their brands and their podcasts and their shows, and these are some of the things that I've learned. And so many people think that they need to be in a silo of me, right? But that's the gold I want people to extract from this story of Matthew has utilized his teachings and learnings from philosophy and creativity to help be in service of others. And through being in service of others, he has made profit. But it does not mean that he is the Matthew show. If anything, this brand that you're creating, Rethinking Podcasting and MB Pod, has been an opportunity to serve others, which I appreciate about what you're saying.
But this is where the pivot point comes for me with the description there. That, we all want to start off entrepreneurially and we look up, what's the best way to create the company? Or create it as a brand that's separate from me. Wait, I should be the brand, personal brand. That's the next big step,
Yeah.
How do I build my reputation fastest in order to become most popular and well-known to, create the business that I want to for myself?
You're going to tackle this. It's going to get spicy.
Yeah. Well, everyone's trying to speedrun it now. I think personal brand at the time we're talking in late 2025, it's becoming the new buzz phrase and a pivot away from what would have been traditionally how you approach a business, like create a name, a brand that no one can deny is awesome. And it's not to say that that's a bad thing at the moment. Either way you could do. But like you said, if you don't spend the time building the reputation, building your skills, getting your hands a bit dirty, and like I did for 7 months of this year, spending 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, podcast editing, just to get things out the door for people. Don't learn what you're offering, like what you're in service to people enough to then realize what people actually need. And that's when you can start talking about what your reputation is, what the brand is going to be like, what your personal brand should be. And I mean, that's a blind spot that people are starting to see, but still aren't talking about in creative media. Like a lot of people have talked about on podcasts, the idea that you're like Simon Squibb, for example. He's someone who he picks people off the street and picks them at random to try and make them great successes. He'll sit down at a table with someone for 46 minutes unpacking how they came to their brand being the biggest success that it is. But you don't see the 20, 25 years he spent grinding to get to the point that he is. We're still in the hustle culture mindset of seeing, unfortunately, I'm sure Alex Hormozy is a great guy, but I have to bring him up because people flock to him to talk about this stuff. 10 clients, $10,000 each, you've made your 100K for the year. That's all you need. Yeah, but what's the rest? Like, how do you fill the 10 client spots for? Yeah. And I think every journey has to involve a bit of adversity and a bit of trauma, a bit of self-discovery to get to the stage where you make the right pivot to do the right thing for your business. And I'm kind of at that inflection point at the moment. So I said I did a lot for other people in the jobs that I did before and in the podcast editing that I've done so far. Something that I do incredibly well is emptying myself as a vessel and giving the entirety of myself for someone to fill with whatever they need. I can give them whatever they want. But I'm now at the stage where, as an entrepreneur working for myself and trying to, I guess, grow, expand, scale, whatever, I need to be able to self-validate instead of seeking validation from others. And what that means for a business pivot is, being a coach and consultant that is self-assured, that can readily offer someone something and have the reputation to back it up, instead of, coming to a client call and them saying, hey, well, what do you offer? I'm looking to start a podcast. And I go, well, what do you need? How much budget have you got? Oh, don't worry. 50% of my rate is fine. We can get your podcast out the door. No problem. There's a bit of ego there that you should be allowed to bring to the table with what your worth is, but also seeking the self-validation to say, my work is good. I don't need you to tell me it's good, but also I'm here to serve where I can. That's kind of where I'm pivoting into now, to be able to offer what I hope is more than just production and editing for clients, but more of a mentoring kind of thing where I can answer the right questions. I can be the confidant or the collaborative partner that you need without having to hire out someone to do everything about your podcast that you could enjoy or you could want to explore for yourself. I think too much in the podcast industry, it's a done for you kind of thing. Whereas having someone there to support you do it yourself, that's a really useful tool to have. But the self-assuredness doesn't come from day one. There are some people who are built that way, but being able to seek that assurance within yourself over a bit of time, as I said, getting your hands dirty, and then getting to the place where you can say, yes, my brand will be mbpod.com or, rethinking podcasting or whatever kind of names you want to put under the umbrella. Realistically, I want people to know my name because it's unique enough, even though there's plenty of Matthew Blisses out there. Mm-hmm. But I want my name to hold the reputation people have and the way people talk about me to others, and to build on that and have that be my personal brand, because it's what I've done incredibly well so far. I just have to change the angle a little bit.
Yeah. That's gold, what you just said right there. It takes years to build a reputation before you can start charging people like 5 figures. And that's what no one really talks about. But the grit that it takes, some people call it post-traumatic growth syndrome, the ability to learn from the difficult situations that we encounter, whether it's business related or life related. I love that you're actually going there with people, which is the perfect segue actually to the second section of our discussion, which is the leap, vulnerability, and risk. So I want you to talk about your own creative disaster or triumph in this section. What is the biggest risk or wild swing you took with your content, or a concept that felt terrifying but was essential for your own personal growth?
See, it's kind of funny. In all the stuff that I talked about just there, I actually haven't had time to create for myself for probably the last couple of years. So, I mean, my hardships, the advantage of doing podcast editing for other people is that you have the chance to improve your skills, but you don't have to have your own show to do it. And that's kind of a conceit of podcast production or being a podcasting professional, is that you can become so good and so focused on the stuff you do for other people that you kind of, it's like being able to build a house, but you can't furnish it. Like you've got the foundation there, like it's rigid, it's solid, you can get it there. But when you need to fill it with content, that's when it becomes a bit of an issue. So probably the best one to tackle would be rethinking podcasting, which first started as Coffee with a Podcaster. And that was probably August last year, I think. People can check the RSS feed and check the dates on the episodes, but that one, Coffee with a Podcaster, was meant to be very short episodes, multiple times a week. And the conceit, the setup was that I was coming into a cafe to talk with you, the listener, about something to do with podcasting that interested me at the time. It could have been something in the industry that upset me. It could have been an aspect of podcast production that you didn't know that I could tell you about. And I sound designed it so it sounded like I walked into the cafe, asked for a coffee and sat down and, talked to the person across the table. But it didn't really give me the framework I wanted, really. And I templated so much. Everything was creatively sorted out at the beginning of recording episodes. Like I turned up, recorded an episode, exported, uploaded, added a show notes and title, and that was it. Creatively, that doesn't really give you much to play with. But it's also, Coffee with a Podcaster was my way of contributing to the industry in order to have a podcast about podcasting. So it would probably fall under the personal brand thing where if you do podcast stuff, you should probably have a podcast. So do a podcast about podcasting. Yeah. And then the Ouroboros, like the snake eats its own tail.
Yeah.
But it just didn't activate me. I found it really hard to come back to the microphone to record more episodes. And eventually it just dropped off. But it was probably not 6 months or 7 months later that I was exploring the work of Donald Robertson. I think I really don't want to forget his name, but he wrote a book recently, How to Think Like Socrates. And that reinvigorated the thoughts about philosophy that I've had. I've always admired Socrates because I've been that person that Socrates as a character in Plato's work has always been, which is the person who wants to engage in a discussion, to query what you say in order to arrive at the conclusion that you need. And it's not that Socrates has the answer, but he can engage in the questioning process to arrive where you need to get to in order to understand what it is. Now, it could be someone is looking for a group of friends that will nourish their social life and make them feel great. And so Socrates sits down with this person and starts to query them about what friendship is and what's the most ideal circumstance in which a friend arrives for them. For what you want from friendship, would you offer the same to someone else? All those kinds of questions that lead eventually to a realization of what the nature of friendship is and the kind of person that you should approach. That kind of Socratic thinking and the kind of questioning involved, I realized was the pinnacle of good interview-based podcasts. It's people who come with curiosity, who are open to discussion, open to questions that might, tickle the wrong spot a little bit, but being able to deal with it a little bit better than other people might. And as you said earlier, the nature of dialogue is an important part of any creative process. And it's most important in podcasting because we have the host and a guest, or we have the host and the listener, the host, the guest, and the listener. Like there's a triumvirate of things going on there that really lend credence to the Socratic method being super important to the podcast industry. And so I thought, well, I like philosophy. I enjoy thinking about stuff, and I've engaged in so much philosophical, academic, I wouldn't say research, but I understand a lot of different aspects like philosophy of mind, philosophy of religion, logic, tons of different areas, philosophy of mind, and bringing those philosophical concepts to bear on the podcasting industry, providing a frame for people to think better and reflect more easily about the things in podcasting that I want to push people in the direction of. It just made sense. And so I came to rethinking podcasting. I think probably within a week, I had a cover art, I had the structure of the show, the ideas that I wanted to put on paper, and the rest kind of just fell into place a little bit. And I mean, it's still an experiment. I think reflecting on the series now, I've really enjoyed doing the episodes. I think they're great for me, but I'm not sure if they're great for the listener. I know there are people who have enjoyed them, but I'd like them to be more actionable and perhaps more direct than they are. Because at the moment, it's very
intellectual.
Highfalutin. Yeah, it's really high up there, whereas someone down here is staring up at that thing and going, yeah, but I'm all the way down here. I'm doing my podcast. How is this? How do I apply these theories, these idea.
Concepts or frameworks? I totally understand what you're saying. That's something that I feel like is a big piece of feedback people give me of, you're so, highfalutin that like, I want to know what to do and how to apply this to my life, which is, I thank you for that, because, sometimes we think other people think the same as we do. And being in service, going back to the last point of the listener, is trying to figure out who we're attracting and how we can serve them through the business and through the brand, which is, how's that going? What are some applicable ways that people can expect for the future episodes?
Well, I think it's not about strapping people down and force feeding them what I want them to take away. I think realistically, it's coming back down from the horizon down to earth again, and kind of giving like a recap and the things you can take from it. It's something that I don't do at the moment. And it's something I realize I do with a lot of people. Like I watch a really great podcast episode, or I see an awesome video about the state of superposition in quantum mechanics and the observer effect. And I'll go, cool. Hey, this is cool, right? And I won't tell them why or what I took away from it that I found interesting. I'll just expect them to figure it out. And invariably that doesn't work, because no one gets exposed to what's in your brain and what you're thinking about. So I think I'm going to take a break with rethinking podcasting at the end of this year, take a few months off and kind of reinvigorate what the episode structure is like. But realistically, the thing I need is to stop shooting for the moon and to go for the moon, but then bring it back down and say, the quantum superposition is an interesting concept where we think about the observation of things and the lack of observation bringing about this different results, instead of just saying, hey, that's cool, isn't it? Instead say, so for your podcast, the more that you don't observe the analytics, the more that you have waves of possibility for how the podcast may be performing. But that lack of observation also informs your intrinsic process to continue to iterate and improve internally instead of just doing it on external audience feedback. So if you don't look at the analytics, you can look at yourself, whether you enjoy it, and if you can tick all the boxes that you need to keep the podcast going, then go check the analytics and see how that informs your process. That kind of thing, I think, is really what I wanted to do with the podcast, but isn't necessarily happening right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That example that you said, my mind is going to a couple of tangential thoughts about.
This is the thing about integrating philosophical concepts with
Yeah.
something that's very grounded. It's that
Yeah.
there's a lot to discuss and unpack that's super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy to get, led away on a merry chase down a different kind of path. Like a thing that interests me a lot at the moment with a few people that I follow online in philosophical circles is panpsychism starting to
Mm.
emerge as a prevailing theory of consciousness,
What's
because
that?
it's the idea that I'm going to struggle to describe it, but for the nature of this recording and episode, let's just stick to the idea of consciousness is starting to change, where
Mm.
the dualistic nature of it, whether it's entirely material or something separate from our material form, now people are starting to ask whether consciousness is a fundamental aspect of our environment and everything begins in consciousness, but there are varying states of consciousness that
Mm.
plants might have that are different to people. And how does the self and identity interact with the nature of consciousness as a thing in the world?
Mm.
And that's where panpsychism comes in. They've talked for ages about consciousness being in everything, and there being a number of problems with that because it's quite an end range discussion about what consciousness is and how it exists in the world. Start at the very bottom and go to I Think, Therefore I Am, John Paul Sartre's
Yes.
meditations,
Yes.
and go from there. But there's so many different directions you can go.
Mm.
And playing with those ideas in something that really should be, tell me what I need to do to get the most for myself out of this thing. There's a lot of different directions you can go, but maybe not the directions people need for the podcast I'm doing.
Yeah, that is an interesting segue into panpsychism and how we can get into those tangential depths. But for the sake of time, Matthew,
Yes.
I want to go into this last question. I want to talk lastly about chaos versus strategy. So we talked a lot about consistency, and you're taking a little bit of a break with rethinking podcasting. Can embracing creative risk and messiness actually be a superior strategy for connection? Or does being too polished carry a strategic risk of its own?
Very fun question. How I usually describe podcasting these days is equating it to the English language. It's messy. There's a lot of rules, but often there are more exceptions than there are rules. And I think podcasting is very similar in this way. And the rules, I think everyone's got their own set of rules that they try to think about. People starting off try to give people rules to ensure that they can get far enough along in the journey to diverge from the common podcasting knowledge. And embracing chaos as opposed to strategizing everything. I mean, there's the Venn diagram and there's a cross section between the two. It's being comfortable with the emergent results of what you do, but also having a strategy as a foundation to approach it. And all of that comes with the exceptions of what you enjoy and what you want to do creatively against the subject matter that you're talking about, the goals you have. Is it attached to a business or a brand? Are there outcomes that you need in order to continue? All of these questions have different answers for different people, and no podcast will be the same. I think for every podcasting or creative podcast so far, I need to mention Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO. For him, you'd look at all those questions and he has a marketing incentive to do it well, but he also has enough financial backing that he can manipulate the small details he talks about a lot in order to arrive at the result he needs. I can guarantee you, he says that he's all about doing the podcast for himself, but if next week an episode got 1,000 views on YouTube and the next one got 500 and the next one got 250 and people weren't showing up anymore, I don't think he'd do it anymore. But that's because the incentive there would be reputation, company, branding, and then the self-fulfillment and sustainability comes about as a byproduct. The emergent properties that come out as you continue your podcast are the things you have to kind of play with, like playing catch with someone in baseball. You don't know what kind of ball they're going to throw, but you're going to watch the ball as it arrives at you. It's going to come at a speed. Your glove is going to be in a certain position in order to catch it. It might go any direction. You might catch it and drop it. You have to be ready to grab it. That kind of thing with podcasting, you kind of have to be ready for as well. You may not be ready for it too. And I think that's okay. Like for some people, it's not being ready for a 22,000 download spike on a weekend, or it's a continued 6-month, 10 download per episode slog where you know what you're doing is what you want to do, but externally the validation isn't coming. And how you deal with either of those cases, being good or bad, is how you embrace that chaos, build it into a strategy, and I'm kind of describing the idea that you're creating a product by taking one gooey thing and another gooey thing and just like shoving it together and like going forward with whatever it is and kind of figuring it out as you go. But I think that's the other part of the industry too. There are people who will sell you certainty. They'll tell you that if you want to do the thing, I have the way for you to do the thing. And that's where an abundance of strategy without chaos is a problem as well. So someone can give you the full refined strategy, but that can even be a risk. Not a financial risk, not a reputational risk, not even a downloads and advertising risk. It could be a risk to yourself because like we talked about earlier, if you're in the middle of a thing that you don't enjoy doing because it doesn't activate you, but because you watched Grow the Show or you were coached or mentored by someone with a K per month downloaded podcast and they want to sell their consulting services to you, then you could end up in a place that isn't emergent enough that you've grown with it. It could just be a vestigial arm that you don't need. I don't think that's the right use of the word vestigial, but you know what I mean. Like it's an appendix to your creativity that you can get rid of and you can continue. And you've got it. And while you've got it, you feel great about it, but it doesn't give you what you need. And that's why I guess the polarity of the question is a good starting point for anyone trying to consider how they should approach it. But it's definitely not one or the other. So if you think about your goals, how you want to approach it, take an intrinsic reflective mindset to it, read up on a bit of Socrates and get stuck into his dialogues a little bit. Have a think about what you really want and what you want to do, what you'd like someone listening or watching to experience. And then start seeing how the crosshairs kind of float between the different areas of that cross section and see whether full emergence or full directed strategy can help.
Okay.
That's a really, really long way to say the answer that appears in podcasting a lot, which is it depends.
Yeah.
Which should be the most common answer
that.
to everything. But hopefully that gives a bit of value to the people watching and listening now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matthew. I always appreciate your very in-depth answer and ways to process and think through things. But this was the sincere practice. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, Helen. It was great to be here.